or you can't do any hunting in Grand Canyon National Park. And so bison figured that out, and then there's also quite a bit of water and some really wonderful lush grass and other forage for the animals. So when we look at it, we start to say, okay, is there a problem with that? Having 350 plus head of bison in the park. And like I said, these animals were crossbred, they're considered Cattalo, and we will look at our management policies. It's pretty clear that we're going to be managing for natural processes. And all of the plants and animals and the park ecosystem, we want to try to keep in a natural system, a natural succession. And so basically we look at exotic species are those that are a result of, purposely something happened by human means and it's been deliberate or it was accidental, but basically there are human activities that have changed the character of these plants or animals, and so we consider those exotic. And then, based on that, we also call that non-native to the area. We also see that they didn't evolve in the ecosystem, and so that also makes them exotic, and they're not a natural component of the ecosystem of that place. And then also genetically modified organisms, we manage those as exotic species. So the other part of this is that we're also mandated to ensure that these park resources and the values are kept in good condition, and actually even better condition than exists today. And so we strive to restore any kind of imbalance that occurs in regard to that natural system. And we've found that the existing evidence suggests that bison didn't evolve in this part of the North Rim, so they're exotic, and that this ecosystem did not evolve with this kind of pressure, such as grazing ungulates and large mammals like this. We also see that this growing herd size and year-round presence in the park is impacting fragile water and vegetation that we have. So you can see the picture of the mud bog area is one of the fragile lakes that we have. We have quite a few, over a dozen of these kind of lakes that exist, plus we have some very delicate seeps and springs. And one of our biggest concern is around impacting of the soil to the degree that it then doesn't permeate, the water doesn't permeate, which creates the real fragile seeps and springs that are down in the canyon. So everything that's coming off of the North Rim, the water that's stored up there comes through a real intricate system and then comes out in terms of these very, very small but very important seeps and springs, very important to plants and animals. And in fact, some of our greatest amount of vegetation and most delicate vegetation exists in these seeps and springs. So we're very concerned about that water not reaching into those seeps and springs, as well as the vegetation and other things that are dependent upon these water sources on the ground level. So, what we're required to do, the superintendent's required to make a determination, must investigate and make a determination if there will be or if there is impairment to resources because of the non-native species or this exotic species. And then if it is determined that there will be or there is impairment, then we have to take appropriate action. And that action needs to eliminate that impairment as soon as reasonably possible. And then we'll take into consideration the nature, the size of it, can we do it, and then also the characteristics of the impact, because is it that we have to do it right now, do we have time, and so forth. So, this, as you know, this all started around coming into the park and becoming a park issue around 1999. And so at that time, folks that were looking at this issue Arizona Game and Fish and the Park Service. These are some of the things that were looked at in terms of, well, what could we do about this? And at that time, we were talking about maybe 120 animals, and that they were coming in and going out. So it wasn't as big an issue as it is today. And the two that you see that are in teal there, those are the two things that were actually attempted. So modification to the hunting season, and that's when they started to realize, Game and Fish started to realize, uh-oh, you know, we're kind of pushing them in by, or we're keeping them from going down into House Rock Valley by having hunting pressure. Maybe we could change that a little bit, and really started to work on that issue. When to hunt them, how, and for how long, and who can, and all that. And then we also attempted to capture these animals in the park. So it was pretty wild. They got this wrangler who came out from, I think it was from Australia. He didn't come from Australia, but he's an Australian. And he was coming out, and yeah, I can help wrangle these, and got a helicopter, and so got the pins set up, everything ready to go, got up in the air, started looking for these, and they could not find the bison. Nowhere, they couldn't find them. And if you know the North Rim, you know it's a very dense and deep forest of mixed con, a lot of down timber, very dark, and these bison are very, very dark. So it was very difficult. They spent the whole week, didn't find a single animal. And I think we spent over $100,000 in finding very good, huh? So that didn't work very well. And all these other things were considered but not followed through. So, in 2008, it's about a year after I came back to Grand Canyon. And actually I worked at Grand Canyon back in the 80s and then came back in 2007. And in 2008, you know, everyone was saying, oh my gosh, we have this problem, we can't seem to get anywhere. So I said, well, let's get all back together again and start talking about it. So we reinitiated our collaborative effort, brought in the Forest Service as well. So Forest Service, Arizona Game and Fish, and National Park Service, Grand Canyon. And we also brought in Dr. Tom Sisk from NAU. And we said, Tom, we really need some help, kind of a third party, doesn't have a buffalo in this fight. Could you help us facilitate this and really bring out what's going on, what could we do, how can we work together, and what's our timing? What do we, you know, are we in dire straits here? What do we need to do? And so he brought his graduate level conservation biology class into the fold, and they were wonderful. They came in with very inquisitive minds and very curious, brought us together, talked to us separately, went out on the ground, we saw bison, we sat around campfires, we talked about the issue. And then they began to do a lot of literature review, a lot of searching, more interviewing, and they came up with an assessment through these interviews and their field observations, and they actually produced a report to give us some ideas on next steps. So out of that, we took their recommendations, and one of the most important was get a handle on what the true impacts are. What's happening, and then what is it that you could do in terms of resolving those impacts. And so we said, okay, we'll do that. And as a result of that, in 2009, Evan Ramonda, who was a graduate student here at NAU, he was selected and to conduct this 2-year study. And so in this, he was going to be assessing the impacts to the resources, and then also exploring methods on how we might eliminate those impacts. Meaning, he was going to, as you can see in the pictures, he put up this exclosure at Little Park Lake, and he's got exclosures at 10 different places on the North Rim. Seeps and Springs, and a couple of lakes like this. And as you can see, it's only half the lake. And the idea is, one is that, have you ever built a bison fence before? It's very, very difficult to keep bison out of somewhere they want to go. And so, as a result, we figured, well, if we put it in half of it, then they wouldn't be pushing in to get into the other half. They have everything they need on this side. And basically it has worked. There have been some fences that have been pushed in